This course is presented to you free of charge by TTJ Tech Services of www.ttjtech.biz and by Stir It Up of www.stiritup.com. And remember, stir is spelled with a U, not an I, so that's STURITUP.com. TTJ Tech Services and Stir It Up are pleased to offer this course to you to the glory of God and to the benefit of all those who listen. Once again, welcome to Voiceover In and Out. Trainer Matt coming at you of TTJ Tech Services at www.ttjtech.biz. All right, so now that we got all that out of the way, we're going to get started. And we've been talking about the fundamentals. And you remember, to review, that I said on Monday, what are you watching when you watch the Super Bowl? Or you watch the World Series, or you watch America's Got Talent or something? The answer is you are watching masters of the fundamentals. That's people that have gotten so good at the basics, the skills they need, that they can do anything else. This applies to sports. It applies to music and art. It applies to our faith, for those of us who are believers in Christ and so forth. There are fundamentals of faith that we can learn that help us on our journey. And it certainly applies to using technology, because if you look at VoiceOver, we talked on Monday about how Apple kind of designs VoiceOver. Again, we can't speak for Apple. We're not, endorsed by them. We're not representing them. But it certainly seems that they've designed VoiceOver that you can use it right alongside of your sighted peers. You don't have to know, JAWS key plus F6 4 times in a row, or this or that. You just if a sighted user says to you, hey, tap that icon in the upper right corner and it will create a new document. Well, you reach up there and because you're a VoiceOver user, well, okay, they said tap, so that means for me double tap. So you learn these fundamentals and what we like to call these predictable patterns. And over the next few sessions, we're going to be really focusing on predictable patterns. Most apps, not all, okay, but most apps are going to conform to one of just a handful of predictable patterns. Things like tabbed view apps, things like list apps, and so on. And so we will get to that, maybe not today, but we will. And we'll start demonstrating some of those different types of apps. Remember that we will be starting experience labs. I will have a definite start date for those for you after today, when we see how far we've gotten today. It'll either be next Wednesday or the following. But we will be starting experience labs. They happen at the same time as our classes, but they're going to be structured a little bit differently than just this normal lecturing style. Give you a chance to try things and to hear from people who are using this stuff every day. Now, some of those people will be me, but it'll be others on our team as well, and maybe some guests and even some students. So we will be dealing with that coming up as well. But we're learning these fundamentals right now because we really need to. We need to have these basics. And on Monday, we discussed the unlocking procedure, how we can easily unlock a device with our face or with our finger. And we can enter a passcode if we need to, even if you have your biometric, your Face ID or your Touch ID set up. When you restart the device, it's going to ask you for a passcode. And every now and then, also it will. Like, I don't remember exactly, but I think if you don't restart your device for like 2 weeks or a week or something, it will ask for a passcode anyway, just to make sure everything's copacetic. So if you all of a sudden get a message that says, your passcode is required to enable Face ID or something, that's just normal. Every now and then that does happen. And also, if you haven't used the device for, I think, more than either, I don't remember, 24 or 48 hours, it rarely happens to me, but if you ever don't use a device for longer than that period of time, even if it's still on, it's going to ask for the passcode again. So there are a few scenarios where it will, and it's good to have at least a 6-digit passcode. And remember, I shared with you that certain features and functionality will actually not work unless you have a passcode set up. So we're going to help you to learn good typing skills on the on-screen keyboard here in this class. We're also going to visit the subjects of keyboards and braille displays and braille screen input and all that. But we really want to give you this on-screen experience first, and we'll help you, and you'll get there, and you stick with us, and you'll be able to do some proper typing, so those passcodes won't be a problem. But most of the time, you can just use your fingers or your face, and that's fine. So we encourage you to set those up. If you haven't, we dispelled some myths about Face ID on Monday, and then we talked about the difference between the lock screen and the home screen. We briefly mentioned that you can customize your lock screen. You heard that mine had on my iPhone the weather widget and the next calendar widget. It tells me what my next event is. And it also has a clock widget for the next alarm. So it indicates the next time I can expect an alarm. And you can put other widgets on your lock screen. And we will show you later a little bit about how to do that. But it's good to know. And if you are a sighted user, we can also tell you how to do that. It's just a long press, which I'll talk about the long press gesture later today. But you can choose more than just the widgets. So you can choose the colors. You can put a photo on there, or different types of things like that. And you're going to learn later that you can have multiple lock screens and sort of cycle through them whenever you want. It's sort of like watch faces, really, if you're an Apple Watch user. You can have different ones set up for different purposes, and you can even link a focus mode to a lock screen. Now, some of you say, what in the world's a focus mode? I barely know, what the home screen is. I'm just brand new. Well, that's okay. We'll get there. You don't need to know what a focus mode is today. All right, we'll get there, okay? But for those who do know, for those who are our veteran users, you can link a focus mode to a lock screen, and that is going to help you. My daughter likes to do that because there's one for personal and one for work, which is school in her case, and things of that nature. So there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot to be said for that. But we're not there yet, because the next thing we taught you was how to go home, how to get from the lock screen to the home screen, or to get from any app to the home screen. And we explained to you the basic gesture, which is to swipe up from the bottom. But we said if you're a VoiceOver user, you have to first place your finger on the bottom, sort of the bottom center, I guess would be the best way to put it. And you'll hear that little blip sound. We demonstrated it. And when you hear that sound, you just swipe up until you hear the second little blip sound. The second little blip sound is accompanied by a little haptic prompt. That means it's going to feel like the phone is tapping you a little bit. And when that happens and you hear that second sound, you lift your finger and you have gone home. So one more time, let's demonstrate what that's going to sound like. I'll do it by unlocking my phone. So here's my phone. I'm going to either probably tap the screen, although when I lift it up, it'll probably wake up anyway. But I'm going to hold it in front of my face, a little bit away. And I like to tilt the top towards me a little bit. You don't really need to, but I'm going to tap on the screen. It's going to unlock. Once I hear the little unlock sound, I will swipe up from the bottom. The whole thing will happen in probably less than 3 seconds. So you're going to hear it now.
2:46 p.m.
And I swiped up and I'm home. And again, in case you missed it, the swipe up sound from the bottom, we'll do the little tap on the bottom and then swipe up. Okay, just so in case you missed that the first time, that's what that sounds like. And now we are on the home screen. Now, the home screen we're going to learn about in just a little bit. It's where all of your apps live, at least the icons for your apps. And we will talk about the different areas of the home screen shortly. But before we can even do that, we need to teach our new VoiceOver users how to move around the screen, whether it's the home screen, the lock screen, or anywhere else. We need to learn a few basic gestures. And this is where we left off on Monday. Now, when you are not a VoiceOver user, you are interacting directly with the apps, the icons, everything on the screen. So you tap on it and it happens, right? So if you want to open your weather app, you just tap on the icon for weather and it opens, okay? And it's as simple as that if you're a sighted user. Now, the problem, not really problem, because Apple has made it very, very easy and very simple. But the issue would be if you're a non-sighted user, if it worked the same way, you would end up tapping on a lot of things you didn't really want to access because you would not know where they're located until you did a lot of trial and error. And that was my first thought when I heard that, Apple was going to release the very first iPhone with voiceover all the way back in 2009. I imagined myself wandering aimlessly around the touchscreen, opening things I didn't intend, because how would you know? And of course, the answer is that's not what it's like at all, because Apple has done a fantastic job of translating it into something that is, maybe this is not the politically correct term, but blind friendly, right? So, how does this work? Well, it works because they've created a thing called the voiceover cursor. Now, the voiceover cursor, if you can see, looks like a rectangle basically. And I think it might be black, but that may change depending on whether you're using dark mode or whatever. I don't know. But it is a rectangle that surrounds whatever you tap. Okay. And it really is, if you can't see it, that's fine. You don't need to because voiceover talks. But I just wanted to let you know, if you are sighted and you're also trying to learn voiceover, or you're using a device that somebody uses voiceover on and so forth, that's what that black rectangle or that rectangle indicates, is it's the voiceover cursor. So it's sort of like that becomes your hands in a manner of speaking, right? Instead of you now touching directly the app and that app opening or whatever, you're using the voiceover cursor and kind of letting that do the walking for you. And the beauty of that is that you can explore the screen without opening the app, without activating the button, until you're ready. And once you find what you want, then there's a separate gesture for actually activating it. So let's talk about how to move around the screen. Everything you do moves the voiceover cursor. For now, I know some of the veterans are thinking direct touch. We'll get there. Not today. All right. So for now, everything you do is moving the voiceover cursor around the screen. And that is how we navigate. So if we want to move, we simply take one finger and we swipe to the left or to the right, whichever direction we want to move. It's very, very simple. One finger swipe. Now, there's a debate sometimes in the community among members as to whether it should be called a flick or a swipe. Apple has used both terms at times, and some people are really adamant about the fact that they're different. They really are not different. They're used interchangeably. They mean the same thing. I prefer to use the word swipe. Now, some people will even say, well, it's a swipe when it's left and right. It's a flick when it's up and down. I can't even go so far as to say that. They're still interchangeable. All right. If you need to do that, fine. It doesn't matter. But I'm just going to use the word swipe, and it'll just keep things consistent. So we take one finger, and it doesn't really matter which one. But again, if I'm holding the phone and I want to do it with all one hand, I probably use the thumb. But otherwise, I'll probably use the pointer finger. And you can literally just swipe from one icon to the next. If you move to the right, you go to the next one. If you move to the left, you go back to the previous one. And let's try that before we go any further. So I have my iPhone here again. I've unlocked it. I've gone home. What I'm going to do is I'm going to touch a random icon on the screen. The screen is filled with icons on the home screen. We're going to learn about the portions or the segments of the home screen here later on today, the components of the home screen, right? But just for now, know that the home screen is filled with icons that represent the apps that are installed on your phone, or the applications that are installed on your phone. And basically, we're just going to take one finger and we're going to touch somewhere on the screen so that hopefully we land on an icon. If we happen not to land on an icon, it's going to make a sound indicating that we landed on nothing. But then I'm still going to be able to swipe left and right anyway, and it'll get me to the next icon or the previous one. And we'll swipe around a little bit, okay? So let's just touch here on I've got my phone here. Let's touch on the screen somewhere, sort of upper middle.
Clock 2:52 p.m.
Okay.
Double tap to open.
You have your hints enabled by default, and I recommend keeping them enabled. We'll talk about why later, but you heard a hint. It said double tap to open. So you already learned a gesture that I didn't even teach you yet, is that once you land on what you want, in order to activate it or open it or type a letter or whatever, it's a double tap with one finger. So we'll come back to that, though. I'm not ready to really show you that yet. All right, but you heard that hint. So let's now do what I said. I'm on clock. I know from experience that there are icons both to the left and to the right of that, and there are icons above and below it. And what happens when you keep swiping left and right is that it's actually going to wrap around automatically. If you get to the rightmost icon, it's going to jump down to the next row. So your iPhone's home screen is set up in a grid, which may or may not mean anything to you. If you've never had sight, you might not know really what a grid is, but basically, like, we might have 4 or 5, I forget, I'll have to count here when I do it, but there's like maybe 4 or 5 apps, maybe even 6, that go across one row, and then the next row has also 5 or 6 apps, and the next row, and so on. And VoiceOver even makes a little sound when it wraps around, okay? And it'll wrap both directions. If you go, oops, sorry about that. It'll wrap both directions, excuse me. If you go, as far as you can to the left in one row, then it's gonna go up to the previous row. If you go as far to the right as you can in a row, it's gonna go down to the next row. And you say to me, well, what if you want to swipe directly up and down? Can't you do that? And the answer is sort of, but not right now. All right, that's a different thing we're going to learn about a little bit later on today. So right now, just do as I'm saying. We've tapped on something. It might be different for you if you're trying it, but I landed on clock.
Clock, 2:54 p.m.
Now,
double tap to open.
Let's show you what happens when I swipe with one finger to the right. I want to also point out one other thing. I know I'm doing a lot of talking here, but I'm trying, based on what we've learned in the past, based on what we've seen from students, I'm trying to cover all of my bases here. When I say to swipe to the right, that means literally bring your finger close to the glass of the phone, and as soon as it makes contact with the screen, swipe. Make the touch and the swipe happen at the same time, so it like lands on the device and swipes to the right at the same time. And maybe I'll unmute trainer Rita here in a little bit, and get her to say that maybe in another way that might be clearer to some of you. But it's very important that you don't just touch first and then swipe, or you will lose your place, because when it interprets a touch gesture, it's different than a swipe gesture. So if I right now told you, okay, you're already on clock, just swipe 1 to the right to get to the icon you want. I tell you, it's just 1 to the right. Just swipe 1 to the right and you'll be fine. So if I do that properly,
reminders, 2 tasks due today.
There it is.
Double tap to open.
And if I swipe back to the left,
clock, 2:55 p.m.
Right.
Double tap to open.
But let's say I did it wrong. Let's say I said to the person, okay, you want reminders? It's just 1 to the right. Okay, just swipe 1 to the right. But if they touch the screen somewhere else first, it's going to move focus. So if I lay my finger down and then I decide to swipe,
home, wallet.
Oops, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You said reminders was just to the right. I got wallet. Well, that's because you didn't just swipe. You let your finger lay first and then you swiped, which is not what we said. So you need to be very cognizant of that. It's one quick move, one quick motion, and that's it. So let's go back to clock again.
Notes.
Whoop.
Clock.
Okay.
2:56 p.m.
Now, let's
double tap to open.
Let's swipe a few times to the right so you can get the feel for this.
Reminders, 2 tasks due today.
And that has
double tap to open.
2 tasks due today. If you can see, there's a little 2 on there. They call that a badge. That app has a badge count of 2 that indicates VoiceOver told us 2 tasks due today.
Maps. Weather.
Now, I don't know if you heard after maps, it didn't just make the same clicking sound. It made just a little extra noise there. I don't know if you could hear that over Zoom, but that noise indicated that it went to the next row. So maps was the last icon on the previous row. It makes the sound both directions. I'm on weather. If I go back to the left,
maps.
See?
Double tap to open.
And if I go to the right,
weather. Double tap to open.
So let's see how many icons are on this row. 1,
Notes,
2, 3,
contact,
4.
news, books.
There's 4 on each row because it went to the next row when it said books. So you can hear that little sound. So that's how easy it is to swipe around left and right, either direction. When I find something I want.
News, contacts, notes, weather.
Let's
double tap to open.
Open the weather app. Again, how do we do that? Double tap. So when we double tap, it's a very quick tap with one finger. Very light, just tap real quick. Now, I want to point out something to you. You don't have to be worried about where your finger is when you double tap, because the VoiceOver cursor is positioned on the most recent thing you touched or swiped to, in my case, weather. And because the VoiceOver cursor is on weather, I can now lift my finger and I can literally double tap anywhere on the screen, and it's going to open the thing that has the focus. Okay, as long as I don't do one of those, like I said, like tap and let my finger lay there, that's a problem. Now, there are certain parts of the screen, if you land right on them, that they may not, it may not seem like you can double tap. And we've seen some reports of people saying, well, the VoiceOver cursor is jumping around for me when I try to double tap. Well, it's not really jumping around. What's happening is you landed right smack dab in the middle of an icon, and VoiceOver interpreted it as a touch instead of a double tap. Is that a bug? I'd be a little bit hesitant to really truly call it a bug. It might be something that Apple can improve over time, but I'd be a little hesitant to call it a bug. Apple support has suggested for people that have that problem frequently that they increase the what's called double tap timeout, which is a setting that we'll talk about later, but it gives you a little longer to double tap if that happens frequently, so that hopefully the gesture is not interpreted as a single tap. It's, a little easier to make sure it's interpreted as a double tap. So if you know VoiceOver settings well enough and you're having that problem frequently, you can try that. But I find if I just tap in a different part of the screen, then that's not a problem. So I'm already on weather. It literally does not matter where I double tap now, as long as I do the double tap gesture properly. 2 quick taps, tap, tap with one finger. And here we go.
Weather. Sunny conditions will continue for the rest of the day. Wind gusts are up to 13 miles per hour.
And I'm in the weather app, and we're not going to explore it right now, although you already know a fundamental that would help you, which is swipe to the left and to the right. And we can tap anywhere on the screen, which is called Explore by Touch. You can take your finger, tap anywhere. You can also leave your finger on the screen and sort of drag around the screen. I find that to be very ineffective because I think that it's rather imprecise. But it can be done, especially for a new user. It could be helpful. But you can touch anywhere and then swipe left and right. So I know from experience the daily forecast is down on the lower half of the screen. I can touch lower here.
10-day forecast. Thursday, partly cloudy, high of 74, low of 52.
Well, that's tomorrow.
For more detail.
And I can swipe to the right. I want to find out what Sunday is going to look like. So let's swipe 3 times to the right.
Friday, Sunday, mostly cloudy, high of 53, low of 43.
Going to get much chillier as the week goes on. Fall is coming. We got a nice fall festival this weekend, and that's going to be perfect because I like to be outside at the fall festival when I can dress in a sweater and stuff. So I'm excited for that. Praise God. So now we're done with weather for now, and we want to go back home. Remember that gesture, okay? So we'll do that. Let's swipe up from the bottom.
Dock.
And we're back home. All right. So that's a VoiceOver basic. A swipe to the left and to the right with one finger to move around, or touch anywhere with one finger, just a single tap. And then, of course, as I said, a double tap to open or activate whatever you land on if you want to. And remember, you can double tap anywhere on the screen. You can double tap. Now, some people even will double tap with 2 different fingers. Maybe you've got some dexterity issues, or, like my dad has rheumatoid arthritis and so forth. So a quick double tap might be a problem for some people. And you can change that double tap timeout setting for sure. But also some people find they can just double tap with 2 different fingers, and that will work as well, as long as you can do that quickly enough. You can use like both your thumbs, one right after the other. You can do what they call a split tap. You can lay one finger on the screen and keep it there and tap with another finger. That has the risk of being problematic if you don't have the right balance of touch, because if it's too hard or too light, it may cause the cursor to move. And again, you get the effect that you're like jumping, VoiceOver cursor's jumping, which it's not really. It's just responding to what it thinks you did. So that is probably the least precise of all of these. In my personal opinion, is the best one is to just double tap with one finger. But you can do those split taps, either, like 2 different fingers immediately, one right after the other, or lay one finger down and hold, and then, while it's held down, tap once with another finger. You can do those kinds of things. They just can be a little bit tricky. So I think if you can master the one finger double tap, that's going to be better overall, because it's going to enable you to more easily understand some of the other gestures going forward as well. So that's our swiping left and right. That's our double tapping. Now, These are what I would consider the most basic of voiceover gestures. Touch anywhere, which is a single tap with one finger. Touch and drag if you really must, though, as I said, I'm not really a fan of doing it that way because it's imprecise. I mean, you see what I mean. If I lay my finger down and drag.
Notes, apps, wallet, TV, clock, mail.
You know what I mean? I'm just kind of all over the place and I'm not really getting a sense of what's going on. It can be useful for a new user, though. But you can also do your one finger swipe left and one finger swipe right. And in most apps, there are some exceptions because of the way the app is designed and the way the screen is and so forth. But in most apps, if you just keep swiping left and right, you will go from the top of the screen to the bottom eventually. You'll get through the whole app or the whole, whatever the interface is. And so that is, your most basic navigation, left to right. All navigation is left to right with VoiceOver, and then you can double tap on something and you can actually open it. We also know how to go home now. Now, before too long here, I'm going to teach you the various components of the home screen. But before I do, I want to answer the question, what about when we swipe up and down with one finger? Why doesn't that just take us to the next or previous row? Well, the one finger swipe up or swipe down, or some people call it flick up and flick down, is a completely different gesture, and it controls a thing called the rotor. And I'm going to teach you what the rotor is right now. The rotor, R-O-T-O-R, is a virtual on-screen control. And it's only for VoiceOver users. It's just for VoiceOver. So if you don't use VoiceOver, this part is not for you. Just sit tight for a few minutes and we'll be back to something that affects you as well. This is just for the VoiceOver users. Okay. The reason for the rotor is because there are certain visual gestures that just don't make sense if you cannot see. All right. And so Apple has provided a way for you to more deeply interact with the screen and do other things by use of the rotor. Now, again, the rotor is a virtual control, and it is activated by putting two fingers on the screen and then rotating them like you were turning a dial, like rotating them around a point. And I'll give some tips on the rotor here in a little bit to sort of help you to maybe master the gesture if it's been a struggle for you. But let's just talk about it a little more first. All right. The rotor is dynamic and it's context aware. What does that mean? Well, it means that what you get when you turn the rotor depends upon where you are at the time. Remember the VoiceOver cursor, that rectangle that does the moving for you. If the focus of that VoiceOver cursor happens to be on, let's say, for example, an app icon versus a web link versus static text in a document versus like a value adjuster to change the volume or to like a scrubber to change your position in a song or a podcast or a TV show. Everything that's in the rotor could be different because of where you are located. And it's context aware. So it's affected by what it's seeing. There are some items in the rotor that are always there, and you can control many of them. You can add or remove items from the rotor in your VoiceOver settings, and you can even change the order in which the rotor items appear. So here's how the rotor works. When you want to set the rotor to a particular category of things or a particular option, you place two fingers on the screen and rotate either clockwise or counterclockwise with those two fingers. That will change the rotor setting. Once you have the rotor where you want it, you use one finger to swipe up or swipe down, and that changes the value, or it acts upon whatever the rotor is set for. Now, this might sound a little bit vague right now if you're a new user, but I'm going to demonstrate it. And when I demonstrate it, it's going to get it's going to get a lot easier and a lot clearer. One final thing I want to say, even for, and this is only really for sighted users that are starting to use VoiceOver, because they're the ones who even realize this is going on, and they're the ones that get confused by it. When you put those two fingers on the screen and rotate them, it actually shows like a dial type of thing on the screen. The rotor actually appears visually. But I want you to understand something, that even without doing the two fingers, the rotor is always, always, always set to something. It's always set to something. So your one finger up and down swipe will always do something based upon the rotor. Sometimes you don't even realize that it's using the rotor, but it is. The one finger swipe up and down always acts on the current rotor setting. So if I were to have a written pop quiz for you, and I were to say to you, what does the one finger swipe up or swipe down do? Some people would say, well, it moves by character. Some people say, well, it adjusts the value. Some people would say, no, those are all correct, but that's the wrong answer. The way to get an A on that quiz would be, what does the one finger swipe up and swipe down do? It acts on the current rotor setting. That is always the answer when you're a voiceover user. The rotor is always set to something, even when you don't see it. So you do not have to, if you are confident that the rotor is set to the correct thing, you don't have to do the two-finger rotation first. You can just swipe up or down. And there are, again, because it's context aware, it will automatically default to the most appropriate setting in most cases. So, for example, if you happen to land on a value adjuster, like a volume slider or like a scrubber for playing music, like I said before, the rotor is automatically going to default to a setting called adjust value. That's not something you have to add to the rotor in your settings. That's not something you have to wonder, is it going to be there? It's automatically going to default to that because it's the most common thing you're going to want to do with that particular type of element, a value adjuster. Well, what if I want to read the characters in that value adjuster? Then turn the rotor and then swipe up and down. That's fine. You can do that, but it's going to default to that thing. There are some things where it just sort of stays where you last had it, and there are some things where it's going to default to them. You can also disable that setting altogether if you don't like the rotor to automatically change based upon the current item, the currently focused item. You can disable that in settings. That's new for iOS 17. I can't imagine any situation in which I would ever want to disable that, because when I land on a value adjuster or a picker in a form, I want to know that the rotor is automatically going to default to that. I can't see any reason why I wouldn't want to do that. But maybe for some people that's confusing, or they just don't like it, so they can disable that. It's a personal preference thing. You're going to hear us say that a lot. So that is the sort of explanation. The rotor has a lot of different options. It allows you to more closely read what's on the screen by characters, by words, by lines. It offers the option to make edits when you're writing, either by viewing misspelled words or selecting text, or using copy and paste and other things. And it also can even allow you to adjust voiceover settings. You can put different voiceover settings in the rotor. It is great for web pages because it lets you choose all kinds of different ways to navigate. A typical favorite of voiceover users, myself included, is by headings. Many websites, probably even most websites, support headings. Not all, but most. And that's a really convenient way because headings organize the website beautifully. And so, if you want to find something, you can set the rotor to headings and swipe up and down to move to the previous or the next heading. So the rotor is very, very powerful. And as I said, now that I've explained it, I'm going to show it to you, and it will be a lot clearer during the demo. So let's go back here to
3:11 p.m.
the home screen, okay?
Weather, 79 degrees, 3:11 p.m. Status bar item.
And what I have a weather widget on my home screen as well. So I'm actually, though, I'm going to open the weather app again, not the widget, because we were using weather a moment ago, so why not stick with that?
Notes, weather. Double tap to open. Now, sunny, 79 degrees, button.
Now, I'm going to go down to the sort of the days, again, the daily 10-day.
10-day forecast. Friday, cloudy, high of 69, low of 60.
All right.
Double tap for more detail.
And it says double tap for more detail. So again, you can activate that and see an hour by hour for Friday. I'm not going to do that right now. That's not the point. Let's pretend that let's pretend that I don't know how to spell the word Friday. And I see it here and I say, oh, I've always wondered how we spell that. So I want to read it character by character. Well, you can do that with the rotor setting called characters. So I don't know actually what my rotor is set on right now. Let's turn the rotor by placing 2 fingers on the screen. I'm going to rotate to the right or left. It doesn't matter. I'll go right.
Vertical navigation.
Okay. Let's go back to the left.
Headings, containers, screen recognition, words, characters.
There's characters. And I know that I'm on Friday, so let's swipe down with 1 finger.
Cap Friday.
Now I swiped.
Yankee.
I swiped down 6 times to hear the whole word, okay? If I want to swipe back up with 1 finger, 1 character at a time.
YADI.
Okay.
India.
And if I set the rotor to words.
Words.
Now.
Friday. Cloudy. High of 69 characters.
Okay. So that's how the rotor works. I mean, all I did was use the 2 finger rotation to go to characters or words. And then I swiped up with 1 finger to go to the previous, down with 1 finger to go to the next. Now, you heard some other interesting things in this rotor. And some of them are here because I've put them there from my settings. And some of them are there because they are just context aware things. And so I'm not going to, there's no possible way that I can get into everything that could possibly be in the rotor. That's not even reasonable. I want you to play with this for yourself, but I will point out some situations where you will see specific things. We are going to go back to the home screen.
Comma.
Here's my phone.
9.
And we'll swipe up from the bottom.
Weather.
And I'll touch an icon.
Home.
Okay.
Double tap to open.
That's the home app, not to be confused with going home to the home screen. That's the Apple Home app that's used for smart home functionality. Now, I'm going to tell you that by default, the apps on the home screen support context actions, meaning different things you can do besides just opening the app. And the rotor also has an actions rotor setting. And when you land on an item that has actions available, the rotor will automatically default to the actions setting. So watch what happens if I swipe up and down. Now, you remember we last were on characters, but because I landed on something that actually has actions, when I swipe up and down now, I'm no longer on characters. Listen.
Edit mode. Activate default.
I swiped up and down with 1 finger and I heard edit mode and then activate. And it told me that activate was the default. And of course, that's what happens when we double tap. We also could have used the other option, double tapped on it when it said edit mode. And that is a rotor setting. If I go through my rotor with 2 fingers now, you'll see.
Characters, words.
Back to the left.
Characters, actions, activate.
Okay, so it automatically, that's where it goes when I land on something that has actions. So you'll see actions in the rotor. That's not something you have to add under your settings. That's just there when it's needed. Okay, it doesn't always appear in the rotor. A lot of times it'll tell you when actions are available.
Weather. Double tap to open.
Sometimes not. And on the home screen,
Notes.
Not necessarily. Now, that's the actions rotor option. Some other things that will appear when they are needed in the rotor. Let's go to the Messages app. You're not used to this yet if you're brand new, but we'll get there. But I just want to point out.
Dock, Safari, Messages, 3 unread messages.
And there's a badge.
Double tap.
And I'm very quickly going to see if there's anything of any kind of urgency that I need to deal with there in my messages. And I'm going to say that there's, okay. Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. Cause I keep my focus mode on, so I'm not seeing these messages. But let's go into one where I could actually type something here just for fun. Not actually going to really type, but I'm going to bring focus to the keyboard of my on-screen keyboard. And again, if you're brand new to this, don't worry about how I'm doing it right now. You're going to learn all of this, but I'm just trying to show you that you'll see some other things in the rotor at times. So I'm on the keyboard and you'll hear things now.
Use the rotor to access misspelled words. Mentions.
See, it said use the rotor. So
mentions.
That's in the Messages app. Mentions. That's in the rotor because it appears in Messages. I don't have to enable it. It's just context aware.
Misspelled words. Swipe left or right to choose a replacement, then double tap to insert.
Okay. Misspelled words.
Edit.
Edit, which right now
Scan text. Scan text.
only has one thing in it, scan text. That's because I don't have any text typed or selected. If I did, I would have additional options here maybe. And if I had something in the clipboard, I would see paste. But you get the idea that some things appear in the rotor on their own when they're needed. Now, there's also a couple that I want to talk about that I often get questions about. What are these? So let me just...
Misspelled mentions, characters, words, text selection. Swipe right to expand selection. Swipe left to shrink selection.
That is one that actually isn't always necessarily in the rotor by default, but I encourage adding it because it's much easier, in my opinion, to select text using the text selection rotor option. There is another way to do it without using that, but I think for somebody who has no sight, and especially somebody who's never seen or has no recollection of sight, sometimes the spatial concepts are harder for us. And so that text selection rotor option makes it a trillion% easier, in my opinion. So I would recommend, again, there's no right or wrong, right? This isn't like JAWS where you have to change 5 settings before you can even use something. It's totally up to you, but I would highly recommend, I'd highly encourage you to put text selection in the rotor. We'll show you how to do that later. If you don't know yet, that's okay. But I just want to point that one out. Now let's keep going because there's a couple others that I have in here that people ask me about.
Screen recognition.
Well, we're not going to deal with screen recognition right now. I do encourage you to put it in the rotor. Okay.
Containers.
Okay. Containers is something I get asked a lot about. What's a container? Well, this is far more useful on the iPad than on the iPhone, but on the iPhone, it can be at times as well. A container is basically an invisible section of an app. It's that simple. It's like the app is divided up into two sections. Maybe one is like the menu at the top and another one is the actual like text of something or, whatever. It's a container. And so swiping up and down with one finger quickly moves you from one container to the other. On the iPad, a lot of apps, it's like the apps that have a split screen view, each of the sides of the screen is one container. So that can be extra beneficial for new iPad users because it's a quick way to move from the bottom of one side of the screen to the top of the next.
Headings.
That one's pretty easy.
Vertical navigation.
Okay, vertical navigation. This is another one that I highly recommend adding to the rotor. That's not always there by default necessarily. Vertical navigation does exactly what it sounds like it's going to do. Remember at the beginning when I said we move left and right by swiping left and right? And then I said, why can't we just swipe up and down to move up and down? Well, if we use vertical navigation, we actually can. So if you want to go directly to the icon below or above the one that you're currently focused on, you set the rotor to vertical navigation and swipe up or down with one finger. Now, that's not the reason I added this to my rotor. The reason I added it to the rotor, or I like to have it in the rotor, is because it's really useful in the calendar. When you are scheduling events using the calendar app and you have an entire month of events and you want to go from the 1st to, let's say, the 18th, if you use the one finger swipe to the right or to the left, you're going to go one day at a time. So you're going to have to go 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, And if you try to just drag your finger around or guess, you could land close to it or you could land way far from it. But vertical navigation takes you a week at a time, 7 days at a time. So I'd go 1st, 8th, 15th. And now I can swipe 3 to the right and I'll be on the 18th. So again, we'll teach that when we teach calendar, but that is why I really like vertical navigation. That use case is in and of itself worth having that in the rotor. I'm not somebody who likes a bulky rotor. Okay. There are tons and tons of rotor options you can have. I do not put, and again, it's personal preference. You do what you want. Okay. But I do not put voiceover settings in the rotor. Other than typing mode is in the rotor, and I think maybe, do I even have language in the rotor? I don't really know why I would if I do.
Text selection, screen recognition, contain heading, vertical navigation, typing mode, edit, misspelled word, mentions.
Nope, and then I'm back to
characters.
Okay, so I do have typing mode in there, and we won't get into why today, but we'll get into that another time. But that's I don't have any voiceover. I don't have, hints in the rotor. I guess screen recognition counts as a voiceover setting. I'm sorry. But I don't have hints in the rotor. I don't have volume in the rotor. I don't have audio ducking in the rotor. I don't have speaking rate in the rotor. Why? Because I never change them. I don't need to. I like where I have it set, and I really don't need to ever change them. And if I have them in the rotor, I might accidentally change them to something I don't like and then have to get back what I really did like. So I don't have them in there. Plus, the more things you have in the rotor, the longer it takes to go around, right? You make in a circle trying to find what you want, and you can go both directions. But if something's 8 away from the left and 12 away from the right, there's no real great solution there, you know? So I like to have a rather minimalist approach to the rotor. I do have headings, links, and form controls, and I think buttons in the rotor. You don't see all of them right now because those appear when you're on websites, but they are in the rotor. Um, I do like text selection being in the rotor. Misspelled words is there by default. You don't have to add that one. Edit is there by default. You don't have to add that. Um, I don't like to have a lot of those other things in the rotor. And besides, there's another way to quickly change voiceover settings if you really need to, called quick settings, which we'll learn about maybe today, or else if not, definitely next week. So that's my 2 cents on that. But again, that's personal preference. And some of you right now, you don't even know how to change this setting. And that's okay too, because we'll learn. But I'm showing you what the rotor is. And I think I've given you now at least a little bit of an overview of what it does and how it works. It is very, very useful. And it's really important because there are many times when you're going to need the rotor to accomplish things that your sighted peers can do in other ways. And so you always want to, as trainer Cliff likes to say, the rotor is your friend. You always want to check out what's in the rotor. And there will be weird things, because here's the really cool part. An app developer can add things to the rotor that only appear in their app. And so, if you use Apple's, which we're going to encourage you to do, if you use Apple's suite of productivity apps like Pages, Keynote, and Numbers, you might find things in Pages like document headings, comments, things that you wouldn't see anywhere else. Or in Numbers, you might see rows, and then like in one in particular live TV streaming app called Philo, they actually have channels in the rotor. So you can set the rotor to channels, and then in the guide, you can go directly from one channel to the next and see what's on by swiping up or down, and be at the same column in the guide, or the same tile for the time. So there are always explore the rotor when you are in a particular app. Take some time. And here's the thing, the rotor may not even look the same throughout the whole app, because the rotor will also change depending on what type of element you have focus on in the rotor. Don't forget that. I mentioned that earlier when I talked about context awareness, and I gave the example of volume sliders and form pickers and things like that. But I really want that to sink in, that you could be in the same app. And here's a simple example, the Messages app. There will be different rotor options available if my voiceover cursor is focused in the list of messages, if my voiceover cursor is on the conversation within a message, or if my voiceover cursor is focused on the actual on-screen keyboard or the edit field. So I could see totally different things just depending on where the focus is. So be very, very aware of that, because that will change a lot depending on what it is that you're doing. So we've learned the rotor as a great way to check out additional items. We've talked about the double tap gesture to open items. There's one more context-aware gesture that has nothing to do with the rotor. It's not just for voiceover users, it's for everybody. So if you're a non-voiceover user, a sighted user, you want to listen up to this now. And this is called the long press gesture. Now, I'm going to teach you how to do it without voiceover and with voiceover. Without voiceover, it's very simple. It's exactly what its name suggests, long press. You just tap and hold. You just press a longer time. You hold the icon for 2 or 3 seconds. If you are a voiceover user, what you're going to do is you're going to double tap and hold. So tap, tap, and keep your finger down for a couple extra seconds. If that's too difficult, dexterity issues, or you just don't like it, whatever, you also, as a voiceover user, can just do a quick triple tap, 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 tap 3 times. And that will do the same thing as the double tap and hold. But all of these are activating what's called the long press gesture. I want you to remember that, because When we say long press, that's what it means. That way I don't have to every time say, okay, long press, double tap and hold, or triple tap, whatever. I can just say long press and you'll all know what that means. So you're all muted. I don't know whether I won't know whether you really do this or not. But for those of you who are really engaged in this class right now, I want you to say it out loud with me. A long press is a double tap and hold or a triple tap. Say it one more time. A long press is a double tap and hold or a triple tap. Okay, that's for the voiceover folks. Now, what does a long press do? A long press brings up context items. A long press brings up additional options that you might want to perform. So, for example, we have an app. We have a whole bunch of apps on the home screen. And what we're going to do is if we double tap on an app, it opens. We've already seen that with the weather app. But what if we long press on the weather app? We're going to have other things we can do. So let me demonstrate. I'm going to get my weather app again.
Double tap to open. Weather.
And we already know if we double tap it, it opens. But what if we long press it? Here we go.
Everett button.
So what I've done, I got a unique sound that indicates a pop-up. And the first thing I see is
New York button. Add button.
I see a couple of my favorite cities listed. I can choose one to get a forecast. I see an add button to add another city.
Edit home screen button.
I see the option to edit the home screen.
Remove app button.
I see the option to remove the weather app.
Dismiss context menu.
And I'm going to do that. Dismiss the context menu.
Weather.
That is the long press action. And that's what it does. It gives you context options. That's another thing I highly encourage you to check out. And some people say, well, I don't like the long press, so I just use the rotor. Well, the problem with that is they're not always the same. The rotor will often have, and sometimes they are the same. Don't get me wrong. In fairness, sometimes they are the same, but not always. And what will sometimes happen is the rotor will have what Apple views as the most common contextual tasks for an item, but not everything. And the everything is reserved for the long press menu. And so long press is a big deal in iOS. It's gotten bigger since 3D Touch was done away with, for those who remember what it was. You really want to do the long press whenever you can and check it out. And some app developers will put voiceover hints in there that'll say, long press this to get context actions, or double tap and hold to see more, or whatever. But they don't always put that in there, and they don't have to. You just check it out and you'll know whether there are context actions. And that's very important. And then to get out of that context menu, just keep swiping until you hear dismiss context menu, and then just double tap on that. Remember, anything we want to activate, we just double tap on it. And that's how we do that. We double tap and we dismiss. If there's not a dismiss option, and you don't want to choose any of the options in the context menu, that's gonna take us to one final gesture we're going to learn before we take a quick break. We're going to go to the other instructors. We have more to teach. We're not done, so don't go away. But we're going to take a quick break. But one more gesture we're going to teach first, and that's a 2-finger scrub. That is another way to get out of these context menus if there's not a dismiss button, and if you don't want to actually choose a menu item. And there are other times when it's a useful gesture as well. 2-finger scrub is placing 2 fingers on the screen and literally making a fast scrubbing motion as if you are like trying to wipe a little tiny spot off of the table. Don't think about like cleaning the whole table, but let's say somebody just, got a little spot of maple syrup on there from eating French toast, just a little dot, and so you got the washcloth in your hand, or paper towel, and you just, with your couple fingers, you're just swiping real vigorous a couple little times there on that spot. Now, some people talk about making a letter Z with your fingers, like Z as in Zulu, with this scrub, and some people even call it the Z scrub gesture. You don't have to worry about that. I couldn't tell you how to make a Z to this moment, but I can tell you that just to put 2 fingers, I use my index and middle, and I just scrub very quickly, and it'll do it. I say probably 3 to 4 times. You do a 3, even two scrubs back and forth will typically do it, and it'll exit the context menu or take you back to the previous screen. Now, I wanted to give you some tips, because this rotor turning gesture to set the rotor when you do the 2-finger rotation clockwise or counterclockwise is something I'm very comfortable with, praise God, but I can see where it could be a struggle sometimes, depending on how you do it, especially if you're not used to it, or maybe, again, there's some dexterity issues. And so I want to point out that there's a couple of different ways to do this. And the way that I've described is what I think is the most common and the best to learn so that you know how to properly do it. And again, I'm using, when I do it, my two, like my index and my middle finger on the screen when I rotate. But I'm holding the phone in the other hand. And the reason that I'm holding the phone in the other hand is because the the phone needs a little bit of leverage in order for this gesture to work. And the question is why? Well, because there is also a two-finger swipe to the right and two-finger swipe to the left, which actually by default doesn't do anything, but it can be set to do something, and it's different than a two-finger rotation. And if you don't have the right leverage so that you can turn your fingers and twist them like you're twisting a dial, then VoiceOver will incorrectly interpret that gesture as something else, like a two-finger swipe up or down, and it or left and right, and it won't do what you actually intended for it to do. And so then people say, well, why isn't my rotor gesture working? Well, probably you're not stabilizing the phone with your other hand. So if I'm holding the phone in my left hand, I hold it, so that the back of the phone is against the palm of my left hand, and I've got some fingers wrapped around it to really hold it steady. Then I can take those two right middle fingers and rotate them on the screen left or right. If I'm going to do it with one hand, it actually works pretty well. Like if I use my left hand, I've got the phone just sitting in front of me and it's stable because it's got a surface under it, my leg or the arm of the chair or the table or whatever. And I can usually make a rotation work pretty well that way. But it sort of makes your arm go in a slightly lopsided position, but it does work. It gets the job done. Now, the other way that some people like to do it is they like to use two separate hands and one finger from each hand, and they'll swipe one finger down while they swipe the other one up. That will often create the correct motion and the same concept as doing the twist. And so, again, that's like I would take maybe the index finger of the left hand and the index finger of the right hand, and I'd move one up while I move the other one down. That's another way you can do it. You can do it with your thumb and your pointer finger, or, there are different ways you can try to do this. And then some people also say, well, I'm just going to put two fingers on the screen and I'm going to rotate the phone left or right. And that will sometimes work as well. The thing you need to do is to find out what works best for you and most consistently so that you can do this quickly without accidentally doing something else. And you're not going to harm anything if you do something else, but you may not get the intended result. So learn to master this gesture in the way that works best for you. Now, again, some of our longtime users are thinking, well, there's also custom gestures you can go in. Yeah, but I don't want to teach that on day one. Because not everybody's going to be comfortable making custom gestures and creating extra things to remember and all that. So I want to do what is standard for everybody right now. And then later on, yes, we will get into the custom gestures. And if you know already how to make custom gestures and you're happy with that and that's what you want to do, then more power to you. That's fine. But that's not what I want to teach on day one or day two. Because not everybody's going to be ready and willing to do that yet. So we will get to the custom gesture concept, but I don't want to do that right now. So you can learn these, you can master them. People were doing the rotor for years before there were ever custom gestures. It can be done. There are different ways to do it. You just need to find the way and figure out what works best for you. I do think, though, the biggest piece of advice that I can give you is what I started out with, which is make sure you stabilize the phone either with the other hand or a flat surface or something, because you've got to create that leverage in order for the screen to properly interpret something as a twist instead of a swipe.
And I'm looking forward to hearing how you take things off of the rotor and put things on the rotor that you want. I'll mute and let you answer my question.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, I'm glad to hear that was helpful to you with the reading by character. And later on, you can actually learn, you will actually learn that you can teach VoiceOver how to pronounce things. You can teach Siri how to pronounce things. There's ways to change that. As far as putting things on the rotor and taking things off, yes, we're going to teach that. If you are already somebody who's comfortable playing around with the settings, you can go into your iPhone settings and go to accessibility and then go into VoiceOver. Then you're going to go to rotor. And then lastly, you're going to go to rotor items. It's the first option in the rotor settings. It's called rotor items. And under there, you can add and remove things. And when you get really confident, you can even reorder things in the rotor. And if that's, overwhelming for you right now, don't worry, because we will actually teach it more methodically here in a week or two. But it is definitely, for those who are comfortable trying it out, that's where you go. Settings, accessibility, voiceover, rotor, and then rotor items. That's an extra step that was added in iOS 17 because they've added some new features. So for the folks who don't recognize that last step, that's why. That's brand new. Hopefully that answers your question.
Is there a difference between the gestures for the iPhone versus the iPad?
So first of all, welcome. I don't think we've ever talked before, so it is great to hear your voice, and I can just already tell you got such a kind heart and a great spirit. I like you already.
Thank you.
So the general answer to your question, Martina, is no. The gestures are very much the same, but then on the other hand, there are some pretty big differences because not only the screen size itself makes things different, but because many apps look different on the iPad because, for example, like if you use the Mail app on the iPad, you're going to have the list of messages on the left side, and whatever message is selected then is going to show its contents on the right side. And then even further to the left, you have a sidebar that you can show and hide, and that has your mailboxes on it. And a lot of apps that are like tabbed view, which we haven't even gotten into this yet, but a lot of apps that are tabbed view on the iPhone are going to be sidebar apps on the iPad. They're almost going to look more like desktop apps because Apple has really made the iPad a desktop equivalent,
Okay.
So I think that if you take this class now and you are really serious about the iPad, if you find this class to be helpful and a blessing to you, then I would encourage you to sign up in the spring for our iPad class when we offer that. It's also free, and it starts in March usually. I mean, obviously, we haven't even announced, dates or anything for that yet, but closer to that time we will. And that is all about iPad. And the cool part about that is it's designed to sort of spin off from this class. So it's not a repeat. Like, we're not going to be teaching voiceover fundamentals. We're going to assume that you already know them. So we're actually going to be teaching the iPad from a perspective of productivity and entertainment, and like, how can I use the iPad to create presentations and spreadsheets and all that. Yeah. So, but it's still got a voiceover focus, of course, because we're all voiceover users. So
exactly. Okay.
Yeah. So I would recommend that. But I think in the meantime, if you have an iPad, a lot of this, yes, it's going to carry over.
When you practice using the rotor, obviously you will be messing up some things. Now, does Apple, does the iPhone retain the last value set on the rotor, or once you exit the rotor somehow? And that was the second part of the question. How do you actually exit the rotor mode?
Okay.
So just a moment. Does the once you exit, does the voiceover keep the value as a default, or does it go back to the customary, well-known non-rotor environment?
Okay, so here's the thing. The first question that you had regarding does it sort of retain or does it default, and then those kinds of things. It's a little bit tricky to answer because it depends on where you are. If you move to an icon or an element that, like, remember I mentioned, like, if you land on an adjuster to change the volume or to change something like that, then the rotor will automatically change to like an adjust value option. But then the next time you go back to somewhere else, it may retain where you were before, if you were on characters or if you were on words. And to clarify, there really is no way to quote unquote exit the rotor because the rotor is always in use. But it will, if you have some vision. I don't know if you have any sight, but if you do,
No, I don't.
No, okay.
I'm blind from birth.
then I don't even really need to worry about this. But for those people who can see, the rotor dial will disappear from the screen. But when you swipe up and down with one finger, it's still going to do whatever it was last set to do, either by you or because you landed on something. Here's the good thing, though. You really will not mess anything up. You really can't do any harm to anything.
A follow-up to the previous question about using the rotor on for example, a web page. I confess I've been flicking around on web pages and not using the rotor to my advantage. Assuming that I found the heading that I want on the web page, and I want to read what's under that heading, is it correct then that I have to reset the rotor to read by word?
Well,
in order to do line by line?
You have to, only if that's how you want to read. But because of the way that website text is set up, 9 times out of 10, once you land on the heading you want, if you just start swiping right with one finger, you will get things read to you in a way that makes sense, because the voiceover will divide like paragraph by paragraph. So you can swipe once, let's say you're on a page that says like about us. So
right.
you swipe down to the heading that says about us. Now you swipe right and it says, such and such a company was founded in 1987 with the mission of whatever. And you swipe right again and it says, find out more by contacting us at, and swipe again and there'll be a phone number and stuff. So usually you don't have to bother with moving the rotor at all, because the left and right gesture always does the same thing regardless of the rotor. So
okay.
If you do need to navigate by word or by line or something, then yes, you are correct. You would have to adjust the rotor value again to lines or to words or whatever it is that you wanted, and then flick up and down. But most times you probably don't need to.
And I would assume if I, for example, wanted to activate a link under that heading, or if I was in a message and reading it, as you just indicated, that I would then go back to the rotor and switch it over to links, and then start a one finger gesture to find the link and then double tap on it.
So if you don't, on a website, if you run across a link when you're swiping left and right, you can just double tap on it. You don't need to mess with the rotor. Now, what you're saying about messages is kind of true, though, because those links tend to look different. They are like embedded. And what'll happen is you'll actually see, like, somebody will send you a link, to a YouTube video,
right.
Whatever it might be. And in the message, it's not going to show you like the link, like HTTP.
Right.
It's going to say like, funniest cat video ever. And so that's like what they call an embedded link, in which case, yes, you're going to be better off to turn the rotor to links, swipe up and down with one finger. You'll land on it and then just double tap. And thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
We'd like to thank you again for joining Voiceover In&Out 2023. Didn't get your question answered? Need additional training? Send us an email at support@ttjtech.biz or support@stiritup.com. And remember, stir is spelled with the U. That's STURITUP.com. I'm Trainer Cliff. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time. God bless.